All rise for the arrival of the Honorable Senate President and the Senators of the Republic of the Philippines.
Good afternoon, Zach. The fourth session of the Senate and the first regular session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order, or second regular session rather. Senator Wing Gatchalian will lead the chamber in prayer.
Let's bow our heads and pray. Heavenly Father, we humbly come before you with hearts filled with gratitude for a gift of a new day. We offer sincere praise and thanks for your boundless grace that has brought us together in this esteemed session. Panginoon Diyos, patuloy mong gabayan ang aming mga puso at isipan upang magampanan namin ang aming kolektibong mithiin bilang mga mambabatas. Sa gitna ng mga pagsubok at krisis na aming kinakaharap, hinihiling namin ang inyong patnubay at gabay. Humingi po kami ng tulong para sa aming mga kababayan na lubos na naapektuhan ng bagyong Egay. Naway, ipadama mo sa kanila ang iyong pagmamahal at pagkalinga at bigyan mo sila ng lakas upang malampasan ang anumang pagsubok na kanilang hinaharap. Bukod sa epekto ng bagyong Egay, dalangin din po namin na ilayo mo kami sa anumang kapahamakan na maaring maidulot ng bagyong Falcon. Dakila at makapangyarihan Diyos, kami rin po ay lubos na nagpapasalamat sa inyo sa pagwakas ng COVID-19 State of Public Health Emergency. Gayunpaman, patuloy mo pa rin pong ipagkaloob sa amin ang kaligtasan at proteksyon sa araw-araw na pagharap namin sa mga banta at panganib na dulot ng iba't ibang karamdaman. In this plenary session, we earnestly seek your divine grace and blessing. As lawmakers of our country, grant us the wisdom to make decisions that will protect and uplift the welfare of our people. In your name, we humbly offer this prayer. Amen.
Amen. Today we will be a performance and presented by the Rogationist Seminary Glee Club, who lead us in the singing of the Philippine National Anthem, and after which she will render a song called Ako Ay Pilipino.
Hanggang maging sa silanganan, hanap ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay, lupang hinirang, tulad na ng pag-ibig, sa manlulupi, di ka masisiin, sa dagat at bundok, sa simuya, sa langit mo, ay dilakang tula at hawin sa paglayong minamahal. Ang isap ng matawat mo'y tagun, kay nanaginingning ang bituin at araw ng kaya. Pamay di magdidilim, lupa ng araw ng walhating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya ng pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Sa Pilipinas na aking bayan, lantay na perlas ng silanganan, wari na tipo ng kayamanan ng may kapal. Pikay ay saking talino sa mabuti lang lan. Sa aking katutubo ang maging mapagmahal. Ako ay Pilipino, ako ay Pilipino, isang bansa sangdiwa ang inimikli ko. Sa bayan ko't bandila, laan buhay ko't diwa. Ako ay Pilipino, Pilipinong totoo. Ako ay Pilipino, ako ay Pilipino, taas noo kahit kanino, ang Pilipino ay ako. Iisa lang ang buhay mo, kumilos ka, gamitin mo. Kung may nais ang puso mo, mangarap ka, abutin mo. Upang ito'y makamit mo, magsikap ka, simulan mo. Magsimula ka, batiin ang kay ganda, umaga nang may ngiti sa iyong mga mata. Sa pagkakaidli, gumising na. Ang buhay ay masaya, palalagpasin mo ba? Magsimula ka, tuparin ang pangarap mong tunay, habang ang lakas iyong taglay sa paghihintay. Baka masanay, sayang naman ang buhay, mawawalan ng saysay. Iisa lang ang buhay mo, kumilos ka, gamitin mo. Kung may nais ang puso mo, mangarap ka, abutin mo. Upang ito'y makamit mo, magsikap ka, simulan mo. Iisa lang ang buhay mo, kumilos ka, gamitin mo. Kung may nais ang puso mo, mangarap ka, abutin mo. Upang ito'y makamit mo, magsikap ka, simulan mo, magsikap ka, simulan mo.
Yes, maraming salamat to the Probationist Seminary Glee Club. Our future priests. Seminary. Oh, Senator Gatchalian was also a former seminarian. Then he met his girlfriend, no more.
I think,
Now,
Mr. President, we need to adjust the sound system.
Sound system. Okay, Secretary, please call the roll of members.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, the Senate President.
With 20 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, again, we'd like to put on record our sincerest thanks and gratitude to the Rogationist Seminary Glee Club that led us in the singing of our national anthem and the song entitled Ako Ay Pilipino at Magsimula Ka Medley. Mr. President, at this juncture, may I just be allowed to greet our dear colleague, our Mama Bear, Senator Cynthia Villar, a happy, victorious birthday, Mr. President.
Yes, happy birthday to our dear colleague, Senator Cynthia Villar.
Mr. President, at this juncture, please allow me also to introduce to the members of the Philippine Senate our distinguished guests who are at the Executive Gallery this afternoon. We are honored to have with us today the Honorable Moriyama Hiroshi, member of the House of Representatives of the National Diet of Japan and the President of the Japan-Philippines Parliamentarians Friendship League. Accompanying him are members of the House of Representatives of the National Diet of Japan and members of the JPPFL as well, namely the Honorable Okuno Shinsuke, Deputy Chairman of the JPPFL, the Honorable Otsuka Taku, Secretary General of the JPPFL, the Honorable Miyauchi Hideki, Executive Director of the JPPFL, and the Honorable Aoyama Yamato, Deputy Secretary General of the JPPFL. Also joining us is His Excellency Koshikawa Kazuhiko, Ambassador of Japan to the Philippines, and our very own Honorable Maylene Garcia Albano, our Philippine Ambassador to Japan. We warmly welcome all of you in the Philippine Senate. The
Welcome.
delegation
Welcome
from
to
the
the
Japan-Philippines Parliamentarians Friendship League has honored our humble invitation to re-establish and reinvigorate inter-parliamentary exchanges with their counterparts in Philippine Congress. From all of us here present in the Philippine Senate, we say to the entire JPPFL, Watashi tachi ha tomodachi.
Good. Yes. And to add, the Majority Floor Leader, we cannot stress enough the friendship that ties Japan and the Philippines together. We are brothers and sisters in the region. We are one family. So please proceed with...
Thank you, Mr. President. At this juncture, may I now move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution number 703 and for the Secretary to read the title of the measure.
There being no objection to the motion, motion is thereby approved. Proposed Senate Resolution number 703 is now in order, and the Secretary will read the title of the resolution.
Resolution expressing the sense of the Senate in celebrating the enduring bonds of friendship between the parliaments of the Philippines and Japan, especially with the Japan-Philippines Parliamentarians Friendship League, under the present leadership of its President, the Honorable Moriyama Hiroshi.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the consent of the body, I move to recognize the Senate President to sponsor the measure. So move, Mr. President.
Is there objection? There being none, the Senate President is now recognized.
Thank you very much, my distinguished colleagues. I rise today not just to merely sponsor the proposed Senate resolution as being the Senate President, but also be the President of the Philippine-Japan Parliamentary Friendship League. So I'm very happy and honored. And I hope my staff can prepare the pictures of our trip to Japan last April. I had mentioned it to them, but I think there's some technical difficulties. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I stand here to sponsor Senate Resolution number 703, authored and co-authored by 24 members of the Senate, which celebrates the long-standing friendship between the National Diet of Japan and the Congress of the Philippines. We also honor our counterparts who are here today, the Japan-Philippine Parliamentarian Friendship League, headed by their distinguished president and our dear friend, Honorable Moriyama Hiroshi. Last July 23, Philippines and Japan marked 67 years of diplomatic relations. Indeed, the relationship between the Philippines and Japan is a prime example of the power of reconciliation and the triumph of friendship. For the last 6 decades, both the Philippines and Japan have extensively cooperated on many areas in trade and investments, infrastructure building, agricultural development, energy cooperation, health promotion, disaster preparedness, tourism, as well as people-to-people exchanges, among others. Our relations with Japan have blossomed into one of the region's closest partnerships, which have been truly mutually beneficial for both countries. Japan is our country's second largest trading partner, with bilateral trade with Japan reaching more than $23.5 billion in 2022. This achievement is a result of the Philippines' first bilateral free trade agreement through the Philippines-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement, or JEPEPA, which was concurred in the Philippine Senate in October 8, 2008 by then Senate President Manny Villar, the father of Senator Mark Villar and the husband of our dear birthday celebrant today. And that was a very memorable day for me, Mr. President, because apparently I was going to give a talk on clean fuels program in Singapore that day. So I just flown out to go to Singapore to give the talk. And later in the afternoon, I was called by Senator Villar, or as Senate President Villar, and said, we may not have the numbers to complete the 16 votes. And so I took a plane, the next plane out. I canceled my talk in Singapore in the conference, and I went straight here. I arrived at 7:30 in the evening just to vote on JEPEPA. I was the number 16th vote. Without my vote as being the last member to vote, we would not have been able to ratify that very, very important, and as we know today, very strategic partnership with Japan. As our top bilateral official development assistance partner as well, Japan's projects in infrastructure development, disaster risk mitigation, food security, health, maritime safety, and peace and development in Mindanao has helped create jobs and helped uplift the lives of many of our countrymen. I want to make a special mention that during the time of Senate President Coco Pimentel, they were very instrumental. Japan was very instrumental in helping us pursue the peace process with BARM, with the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. In this regard, my dear friends, Philippines and Japan are not just ordinary country partners. We are strategic partners who share the principles and aspiration of freedom, democracy, and rule of law. In this regard, we are very glad to know that Japan stands with the Philippines in maintaining stable regional order to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific. Japan has also reaffirmed on numerous occasions its unwavering support for the Philippines and its decision to uphold the Permanent Court of Arbitration's ruling on the South China Sea arbitration. This undoubtedly is the action of an ally and a true friend. In light of their importance to the Philippines, Japan was among the first countries President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. visited in the first year of his administration. This representation was privileged to join the President's delegation last February, and I personally witnessed significant developments in our strategic partner where 7 new bilateral agreements were signed and $13 billion worth of investments were pledged. We also saw the strengthening of our defense and security cooperation relationship with greater resolve. In view of our long-lasting and burgeoning relations, we have been honored to be visited by the JPPFL under the present leadership of its distinguished president, Honorable Moriyama Hiroshi, who we are honored to have with us today in our Senate. He is accompanied by the Honorable Okuno Shinsuke, the JPPFL Vice President, the Honorable Otsuka Taku, the JPPFL Secretary General, the Honorable Miyauchi Hideki, the JPPFL Executive Director, and the Honorable Ayama Yamato, the JPPFL Deputy Secretary General. And of course, our dear friend, the Ambassador, His Excellency Koshikawa Kazuhiko, our ambassador, the ambassador of Japan to the Philippines, is also with us today, as well as the Honorable Mylene Garcia Albano, the better Albano, our Philippine ambassador to Japan, is with us as well. I welcome them warmly to our Senate. We consider our parliamentary relations with Japan as the most robust and most dynamic among international colleagues, which accurately reflects our excellent state of bilateral relations. Since 1987, our Filipino-Japanese lawmakers have held frequent exchanges and frank and substantive dialogue and discussions through our respective parliamentary friendship associations, the Philippine-Japan Parliamentarians Association, which I currently chair, and with the JPPFL. Sadly, however, our exchanges were interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. This is why, as soon as the pandemic restrictions were eased, a delegation from this chamber traveled to Tokyo last April to symbolize that Filipino senators are once again ready to engage with their Japanese counterparts and bolster agreements and achievements of the visit of President Bongbong Marcos in February. I'm not sure if my staff can show pictures on screen of our official trip to Japan. Mr. President, it was an honor for me to lead this delegation. And this delegation, I would say, this trip was probably one of the most successful interparliamentary trips that the Senate has had in quite a while, wherein we were able to meet not only leaders of the Japanese Diet, as well as the upper chamber of Japan, including the Prime Minister of Japan was with us. Mr. President, I was accompanied by our Majority Floor Leader, Senator Joel Villanueva, Deputy Majority Leaders J.V. Ejercito and Mark Villar, together with our Foreign Relations Committee Chair, Senator Amy Marcos, as well as Senator Pia Cayetano, Senator Lito Lapid, Senator Sani Angara, Senator Nancy Binay, Senator Grace Poe, and Senator Win Gatchalian. We had almost enough to have a Senate session in Japan with the quorum. Our delegation was ably assisted by the men and women of our embassy in Tokyo, headed by Ambassador Mylene Garcia Albano. During our visit, the delegation gained a deeper understanding of Japan's national security outlook and defense strategy from our top officials of the National Security Secretariat and the Ministry of Defense. We also held productive discussions with the President of the House of Councilors of Japan, that is our counterpart in Japan, Honorable Utsuji Hidehisa, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Honorable Hosoda Hiroyuki, as well as the members of the JPPFL headed by Honorable Moriyama Hiroshi. Our meetings with our parliamentary counterparts revealed that the COVID-19 pandemic has not diminished the desire to maintain strong ties between our two countries through active interparliamentary relations. Our counterparts recognize the need to promote our flourishing bilateral relations, as well as contribution to the 290,000 Filipino workers in Japan. They also emphasized the need for greater cooperation in the near future, particularly in the efforts that will ensure peace and stability to our region through closer defense and security cooperation. The highlight of the visit was our call and dialogue with the distinguished Prime Minister Prime Minister His Excellency Kishida Fumio, which was indeed a rare privilege. Prime Minister Kishida underscored the continuous bilateral cooperation between our two countries and reiterated Japan's commitment to the Philippines, particularly of Mindanao and BARM. I hope that they can flash the screen our picture with Prime Minister Kishida. He also reiterated our continued commitment to a free and open international order-based rule of law. Likewise, the Prime Minister expressed his support for stronger and increased parliamentary exchanges and enlisted continued engagement and support of Philippine senators. We were really privileged and honored to meet the Prime Minister of Japan at that time. I in turn emphasized the importance of Philippine-Japan strategic partnership and informed him of our challenges in upholding Philippine sovereignty in our own exclusive economic zone. We also expressed our support to the initiative for a reciprocal access agreement, or RAA, between our two countries. Finally, on behalf of the delegation, this representation, with the consultation of our Speaker of the House of Representatives, invited Prime Minister Kishida to address both houses of Congress in a special joint session during a future official visit to the Philippines. It is an honor given only to, I think, a handful of leaders around the world. Undoubtedly, these interparliamentary exchanges and dialogue contribute in no small ways to shaping our bilateral relations and to the formulation of bilateral agreements and treaties between the Philippines and Japan. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear colleagues, Japan remains a true partner to the Philippines in every essence of the word. As a Mindanaoan, or Mindanaonon, as the father of Senator Pimentel would say, I would always like to express my thanks for the Japanese Parliament's support for the development aid to the Philippines that has significantly improved the peace situation and the lives and welfare of our countrymen, especially in my region of Mindanao. In light of the very warm reception we received from the government and Parliament of Japan, in particularly the JPPFL during our visit to Japan last April, and their continued commitment to support the development of the Philippines, it gives me great honor and pleasure to sponsor Senate Resolution number 703, recognizing the enduring inter-parliamentary friendship between the Philippines and Japan under the leadership of its distinguished President, Honorable Moriyama Hiroshi. Once again, I ask the support of all my colleagues for the unanimous adoption of this resolution. Mabuhay po ang Pilipinas, mabuhay po ang Japan. Thank you very much.
We thank the Senate President for his sponsorship of the resolution. May I now invite him back to the rostrum to preside over the session.
Mag-insert na lang ako. Insert na lang ako. Pinakita kasi insert na lang ako.
Mr. President,
Just want to say that is the picture with the Prime Minister when we were in the Prime Minister's house in Tokyo. Yes, Majority.
Domo arigato gozaimasu. Mr. President,
Arigato
I know a lot of our colleagues would like to co-sponsor the measure, but due to the time constraints, because they are expected, our guests are expected to be at the House of Representatives at 4:30 in the afternoon. This representation, together with Senate President Pro Tempore Lauren Legarda, would just like to insert into the records our co-sponsorship speech. Meanwhile, Mr. President, some of our colleagues would just deliver a short sponsorship speech. I now move that we acknowledge Senator Grace Poe for her sponsorship speech. So move, Mr. President.
Senator Grace Poe is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I feel compelled to really give this verbal affirmation of our appreciation, especially because I'm chairman of the Committee on Public Services. Allow me to briefly state for the record in concrete examples Japan's contribution to advancing mobility and connectivity in the country. With Japan's assistance, we recently inaugurated the new state-of-the-art LRT-1 fourth-generation train sets that will not only increase transport capacity, but also provide faster, safer, and more comfortable train rides to Filipino commuters. We are also looking forward to experiencing world-class Japanese railway expertise as we see the completion of the country's major railway projects in the next years, such as the North-South Commuter Railway, which will pave the way towards greater connectivity between Central Luzon and Calabarzon, and the Metro Manila Subway project that is not only distinctive as the first subway in the Philippines, but with Japanese technology, the structure will be flood and earthquake-proof. Of course, we are also grateful for Japan's continued support of the MRT-3 rehabilitation program. We also thank our Japanese partners for lending us their extensive knowledge and expertise on railway technology and operations to train Filipinos and assist in research development through the Philippine Railway Institute. The Japanese government's unfailing support to our country is a testament to the robust bilateral relationship between Japan and the Philippines built through 67 years of friendship and cooperation. As we move ahead, the Philippines is excited about new learning opportunities and intensified collaborations with Japanese partners towards our vision of a growing and more developed Philippines. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Senator Graceful.
Mr. President, at this juncture, may I just also put into the records that this co-sponsorship speech of Senators Revilla, Gatchalian, and Estrada, and Padilla be also inserted into the record. So move, Mr. President.
We take note of the motion of the Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, there being no member who wishes to interpolate or propose amendments to the measure, I move that we unanimously adopt proposed Senate Resolution number 703. And with the consent of our colleagues, I move that all members of the Senate be made co-authors of this resolution. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion of the Majority Floor Leader and adopted by all members of the Senate, Senate Resolution number 703 is hereby adopted by the Philippine Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, may we invite the Honorable Moriyama and his colleagues from the JPPFL to personally receive the Senate resolution from the Senate President. May I ask that session be suspended?
Session is suspended, and may I also ask my colleagues to join us in a photo opportunity with our dear friends from the Japanese Parliament. Session suspended. restroom.
Mr. President, before we go for third reading, Mr. President, we'd like to acknowledge some guests from the gallery from Unified Federation of PhilAm Educators, led by its founders, Ms. Paraluman Castañeda and Dr. Ronnie Matakel. We welcome them in this August chamber, Mr. President.
Welcome to your Senate, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move to consider on third reading Senate Bill number 1806. This is the bill on the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights and Obligations Act. Printed copies of the bill were electronically distributed to the members on July 27, 2023, in compliance with the 3-day rule in the Constitution. I so move, Mr. President.
Before we take it up, we'll ask our colleagues to adjourn first their sessions. Thank you, so that we can proceed with the roll call vote. There being no objection to the motion of the majority floor leader, we ask the secretary to proceed with the reading of the title and as well as the roll call vote.
An act providing for the Bill of Rights and Obligations of Taxpayers, creating the Office of the National Taxpayer Advocate, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. Roll call vote. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, the Senate President.
Yes. With 22 affirmative votes, 0 negative votes, 0 abstentions, Senate Bill number 1806 is approved on third reading. Congratulations to sponsors and authors.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, congratulations to the authors of the measure. Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the third session, Wednesday, July 26, 2023, and consider the same as approved.
There being no objection to the motion, motion is approved.
Mr. President, at this juncture, with the permission of the body, I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize our distinguished minority leader, Senator Coco Pimentel.
Just also a reminder before I recognize Senator Coco, we'll have a quick caucus also in the back. We have with us the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, General Bronner, as well, head of the AFP Chief of Staff, for some exchanges on the West Philippine Sea issue. But yes, we would like to recognize our distinguished minority floor leader to give his contra sona. Our distinguished minority floor leader, Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel III, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I come before you today to deliver what many refer to as the contra sona. However, I am not here today to counter all of what the President has said in his State of the Nation address last July 24, 2023. I want to deliver the realistic sona, the more realistic report on the state of the Filipino nation, with the people, the ordinary Filipino, as the focus. Let me start by congratulating the President for seriously discharging his constitutional duty to deliver the State of the Nation address. He obviously gave it his best. Before I proceed, allow me to extend our prayers to the more than 2 million Filipinos affected by the strong Typhoon Egay. Our condolences to all those who lost loved ones. We stand ready to help those affected, and I ask the Senate leadership to relax our regulations to the extent possible so that each office can be allowed to extend additional help or assistance to the typhoon victims. Naway patuloy ang ating pamahalaan sa pagpapaabot ng agarang tulong at suporta upang mabilis na makabangon ng ating mga kababayan. Back to our subject matter. The state of the nation is worrisome, nakakabagabag, nakakabahala. Mahirap ang buhay ng Pilipino ngayon. Mahal ang presyo ng pagkain at iba pang bilihin. At patuloy pa rin ang pagtaas ng presyo ng mga ito. Isama na rin natin dyan ang gastos sa tubig, kuryente, renta, transportasyon at iba pang importante at hindi maiwasang mga gastusin. Hindi tama sabihin na sa mga nakalipas na buwan, nakita natin ang pagbaba ng presyo ng bilihin sa iba't ibang mga sektor. Ito ang nakita namin ng aking staff nung ikumpara namin ang presyo ng mga pangunahing bilihin ngayon sa presyo nito noong Hulyo-Enero 2022. Ang bigas, pangkalahatan hindi bumaba, ang ibang varieties tumaas pa nga eh. Isda, hindi bumaba, ang ibang klaseng isda tumaas pa. Karning baka, baboy, manok, pangkalahatan hindi bumaba, tumaas pa. Gulay, pangkalahatan, hindi bumaba. Ang ibang varieties, tumaas pa rin. Prutas, marami ang tumaas. Mga pampalasa or pangsahog, karamihan tumaas. Lalo na ang sibuyas, sobrang taas. Pero ang local garlic sa research namin ay bumaba naman ang presyo. Asukal, tumaas. Cooking oil, halos pareho lamang. Kuryente, tumaas. Tubig, tumaas. Pamasahe, tumaas. Meron tayong cost of living crisis ngayon. And let us add to this the cost of dying. Dapat tignan din ito ng ating gobyerno. Tapos, baon pa tayo sa utang. With national debt at 14.1 trillion pesos and a population, let's put it at 117 million, each Filipino has a debt of around 120,000 pesos. This national debt figure does not even include the GOCC and LGU debts. Some of our learned big thinkers say that we don't need to worry about our debt because our economy can outgrow our debt. However, it is senseless to talk about outgrowing our debt if we cannot even show that our so-called growing economy has enabled us to bring down the principal of our debt. The fact that our national debt has doubled in just 6 years clearly indicates that we have not succeeded in decreasing the principal sum of our debt. We have also heard it said that we need not worry about our debt because this is not due all at once. Well, then this only means that the Filipino people will be paying for this debt all throughout their lives in the form of higher taxes, fees, and other charges. Mamamatay na lang tayo, nagbabayad pa rin tayo ng utang, tapos meron pa tayong ipapamana sa sunod na henerasyon para sila naman ang sumunod sa parehong ikot ng buhay. Mr. President, ang lumulobong utang ng bansa ay nararapat lamang mapag-usapan na. Nakakalungkot na hindi ito nabanggit ng Pangulo sa kanyang SONA. Corruption has definitely contributed to the ballooning of our debt. A few years ago, a deputy ombudsman, using United Nations Development Program's estimates, said that corruption loss in the Philippines equated to 20% of its annual government appropriation. In the 2022 Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International, which rates countries based on the perceived level of public sector corruption, the Philippines ranked 116th out of 180 countries, scoring only 33 out of 100, which is way below the global average of 43. The lower the score, the more corrupt in perception. Ang ibig sabihin nitong study na ito ay corrupt ang tingin ng mundo sa ating bansa. Baka hindi alam ng Pangulo na dumarami na ang reklamo laban sa korupsyon. At marami na rin ang nagsasabi na puno na ng sindikato ang gobyerno, kada ahensya meron. The President's SONA did not tackle the issue of corruption. We need this government to show that it is committed to the fight against corruption. We need to hear the orders being issued. We need to know who are assigned to do the crackdown. We hope President Bongbong Marcos will soon announce his administration's game plan in fighting the worsening corruption. The president in the SONA said, "We cannot tolerate corruption or incompetence in government. This government's preoccupation with logos, or what I call logovernance, is a manifestation of wasteful spending and incompetence, if not corruption. Spending millions of pesos for slogans and logos is indicative of misplaced priorities. Let us go beyond sloganeering and logovernance and spend our money wisely on actual programs which directly benefit our people. If our government leaders feel the itch to spend money but don't know where to spend it on, don't spend on new slogans and logos. Instead, I suggest that they contribute the amount to addressing our more pressing concerns like increasing our food production, addressing our education crisis, improving our health services, lowering our energy cost, taming inflation, eliminating injustice, providing jobs, fighting crime and corruption, supporting our creative industries, multiplying connectivity, among many others. These are expenses which invest in the productivity of our people. We cannot afford to be wasteful, to waste funds, or to waste time. Let us put a stop to this practice of giving confidential and intelligence funds to those government agencies which are not even engaged in national security work and public order or law enforcement. Let us remember that this administration has allocated a whopping 10 billion pesos in Filipino taxpayers' money to the confidential and intelligence funds of various government offices in the 2023 national budget. I hope the President and his cabinet can intervene to stop these manifestations of incompetence, if not corruption, like the following, among others. Ang kaliwat kanan ng mga issue sa ating immigration at mga airlines, unlawful offloading, unnecessary and arbitrary interrogations, flight delays and cancellations, difficulty in obtaining refunds, among others. I am also making an issue out of the imposition of the travel tax on our people's right to travel. Remember that Article 3, Section 6 of the 1987 Constitution guarantees the liberty of travel, which shall not be impaired except in the interest of national security, public safety, or public health, as may be provided by law. We cannot and should not tax the exercise of a right. In December 2022, a Filipina missed her flight to Israel as the immigration officer asked her lengthy, irrelevant questions and demanded to see her yearbook, graduation photos, emails, and private messages. In April 2023, a Filipina and her partner were barred from leaving for Hong Kong as she's still employed in the United Arab Emirates. Bawal na bang magbakasyon ang isang OFW sa ibang bansa? Recently, a traveler was not allowed to board her flight to Taiwan for failing to present 10 birth certificates to show her relationship with her sponsor. Mr. President, ito po ay nakakalungkot at nakakabahala. It's a total nightmare to experience what these offloaded passengers have gone through. Waste of money, time, and all that is invested in planning their trips abroad. While we recognize the duty of the Bureau of Immigration to combat human trafficking, this duty should not compromise the constitutionally protected right of Filipinos to travel. Ang mga kapalpakan sa Land Transportation Office or LTO. Various controversies have plagued and continue to plague the LTO. hindi maasahang online portal and computerized systems, matagal na paghihintay at backlog sa lisensya at plaka bukod pa sa iba. As of June 2023, the backlog in the license plates has surged to approximately 690,000. There is an allegation that since 2017 up to the present, only one supplier has won LTO's yearly contracts for the supply of vehicle license plates and other related goods, and that the license plates order management system is privately owned and by a foreign corporation. Only the supplier who has access to the OMS can generate the QR codes required by the system. Talk about system capture. In order to address the shortage in driver's license cards, the LTO has resorted to considering the paper-based official receipt as a temporary driver's license. Issues plaguing the LTO's IT infrastructure are yet to be addressed and solved. The experience of the LTO is one of the best examples of the loopholes, the money-making opportunities in digitalization. We also have the case of collapsing bridges. In 2020, we encountered a number of bridges collapsing. San Juan Bantilan Bridge connecting Batangas and Quezon, Borja Bridge in Bohol, Carlos P. Romulo Bridge in Pangasinan, and many others. The collapse of the Clarin Bridge in Bohol injured 23 and took the lives of 4 people. And then just recently, the Malamba Bridge being built in Davao City collapsed, resulting in 5 deaths and 2 injuries. The PNP's involvement in illegal drugs and failure to solve, hence deter killings. In October 2022 in Manila, authorities confiscated 990 kilograms of shabu with an estimated value of 6.7 billion pesos. 50 police personnel, including high-ranking officials, were found to be involved in the anomalies and massive cover-up in the operation. On November 26, 2022, 5 persons, including a minor, were killed in a shooting and hacking attack in Barangay Songko, Lantapan, Bukidnon, unsolved. On June 14, 2023, the Fausto family was massacred in Himamaylan City, Negros Occidental, unsolved. On July 1, 2023, 2 village officials were shot dead in Barangay Baganihan in Marilog District, Davao City, unsolved. Sobrang dami pa ng mga kasong patayan at karahasan na hindi pa nalulutas. Maubusan tayo ng oras kung babanggitin natin lahat ng mga ito. Justice remains elusive. Just recently, the DOJ junked a murder case filed against policemen. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, passed to the grieving family members the burden of proving that the bullets which killed the victim came from the police. How are ordinary Filipinos supposed to have the resources to prove ballistics? I therefore call the attention of the PNP Internal Affairs. Act on matters like this. It is unfortunate as well that the case of the missing sabongeros is yet to be resolved. Nasaan na sila? Nag-aantay pa rin ang kanilang pamilya. Hindi alam kung buhay pa or something worse has happened to them. The families are calling out again for justice. And they are dismayed that the monthly case conference of the DOJ on the matter has been stopped. We must bring justice to the families of all of the disappeared. Sabi ng Pangulo, nagsisimula ang lahat sa edukasyon. Sang-ayon po ako dyan. Education is the great equalizer. Therefore, education should truly enjoy the highest budgetary priority. To prepare our nation for the future, we must focus on education. Kaya ayusin natin ang software at hardware ng edukasyon. The software would be the curriculum, the content, and how these are taught. The hardware would be the classrooms, facilities, and materials. And since we are using an analogy involving the computer, I propose the incorporation of computer coding or programming in the curriculum. Let us prepare for the future high-tech world and let us prepare our people early. In the aspect of health, let us not forget our senior citizens and those with mental health conditions and the families taking care of them. The average life expectancy of Filipinos is around 72 years. Meanwhile, the number of senior citizens in the Philippines continues to increase. Based on the latest available data from the PSA, senior citizens constitute 8.5% of the population, or around 9.22 million. The Population Commission projects that in 12 years' time, 14% of the population will be senior citizens. We value our elders for their invaluable wisdom and the contributions they have made to our nation. It is therefore ironic that many of our parents and grandparents are left behind in terms of healthcare. Although we are approaching healthcare through the mechanism of regional specialty hospitals, let us be aware that we do not have an apex hospital for the age-related and age-induced health concerns of the aged and the aging. We need to establish a national geriatric hospital. This is the National Hospital for Senior Citizens, where our doctors can develop specialty knowledge and skills in geriatric medicine, which is the healthcare and treatment of elderly persons. Also, let active aging be our formula when it comes to our policies for senior citizens. Let us still tap them, involve them, and seek their wise advice. Families taking care of persons with mental health conditions must be given assistance and support in addition to the exemption from VAT of certain medicines. And let us extend this assistance to the schools, orphanages, and other entities like charitable organizations which are focusing on this neglected and close to invisible segment of our society. Ito, aktual na reklamo ng isang nanay na dalawa ang anak na autistic boys. Nalaman niya na ang PWD na dependent ng isang SSS member ay may benefits din pala. And I will now quote her. Ang medyo hindi maayos, sir, ay yung requirement na recent medical certificate kasi hindi kami masagot ng maayos kanina. Sabi po, dapat doktor sa brain dahil sakit daw ang autism. So sinabi naming na hindi sickness kundi disorder. And the boys are eligible dahil lifetime ang condition nila. We told them ang autism ay hindi naman gagaling at papaano ang families na hindi makaka-provide ng recent na medical certificate from a development pediatrician dahil sa napakamahal at hindi agad-agad na appointment. As usual po, ang sagot sa amin yun daw ang requirement nila. Nakakalungkot, di po ba? Kasi families like us really need these benefits. So it means, habang hindi nakaka-comply sa requirements, hindi makaka-file ang family ng benefits kahit kailangan na. This is also proof na hindi talaga nauunawaan ng karamihan ang kondisyon ng mga batang tulad nila. End of quote. Those two boys have already been diagnosed to be within the autism disorder spectrum. But the SSS requires a recent medical certificate. Let us not have programs for the needy only on paper. Let us understand the spirit and purpose behind these programs and implement them in good faith without putting unnecessary obstacles along the way which actually defeat the very objective of the program. let us also not forget our persons with disabilities. Let us extend to them whatever help we can afford. For the blind, for example, there is a school for the blind based in Metro Manila, which has a budget of only 22.7 million pesos. Kulang ang budget, kulang din ang bilang ng paaralan para sa mga bulag. Paano na yung nasa Mindanao at Visayas? Tulungan po natin sila. Our healthcare workers, the unsung heroes, do not receive enough allowances and benefits. According to the Professional Regulatory Commission, the Philippines has a supply of doctors, nurses, and other health workers, but only a fraction are in actual practice of their profession. We do not have, for example, we do not have sufficient civil service posts for nurses and psychologists. Our healthcare workers deserve a career path even in government service. Bigyan naman natin ng angkop na dignidad ang ating mga bayani. The President started his SONA with the mention of macroeconomic data like GDP growth rate. That reported 7.6 GDP growth rate in 2022 means nothing to the ordinary Filipino. The cost of living is very high. The income of the typical Filipino family is not enough for their basic needs and for their decent existence as a family of human beings. Those who are employed are not paid living wages. Many are unemployed and many more are underemployed. Bantayan natin ang presyo ng pagkain. Huwag natin hayaan itong tumaas ng tumaas. Kung pwede nga, pababain pa natin ito. Lalo na kung hindi naman napapataas ang sahod ng mga manggagawa natin. There was no mention in the SONA about the need to increase our people's wages, especially the minimum wage, given the ever-increasing cost of living here in the Philippines. Since our regional wage boards have been slow to react to realities on the ground, we need to legislate a new national minimum wage, which will ensure that all workers receive a just living wage. I have grave doubts on the reported 95.7% employment rate. That leaves us with only 4.3% unemployment rate. At that rate of unemployment, the Philippines can be considered a fully employed economy. That means that all willing and able individuals who are seeking employment are able to find suitable work. Is that what we see on the ground? Is that consistent with our experience? Sa dami ng lumalapit sa atin na naghahanap at humihingi ng trabaho, imposibleng nasa full employment status na po tayo. Sa aking opinyon, merong mali sa pagkolekta natin ng datos. The figures on employment matters are misleading and do not reflect the true state of the nation. The President mentions that the Kadiwa store concept has shown that we can bring down the prices of rice, meat, fish, vegetables, and sugar. However, what we should understand is that the Kadiwa stores are in effect pop-up discount stores which are location-bound, time-bound, and with limited supply of goods. In short, these are set up quickly for short-term operation in a temporary location. Band-aid solution. Ang kailangan natin ay pangkalahatang pagbaba ng presyo ng mga bilihin, lalo na ng pagkain sa buong bansang Pilipinas. Walang pinipili, lahat makikinabang. And to achieve this with food items, I agree we have to boost agricultural production. And our farmers must be able to sell in volume. To generate and produce both jobs and food, and at the same time fight inflation, let us concentrate on agriculture. Produce more food, increase the yield of our land. Productivity is the answer. On the matter of inflation, recent data from Pulse Asia indicated that 3 out of 5 Filipinos believe that the government should address the rising prices of goods and services. According to the International Monetary Fund, the Philippines ranked 3rd among Southeast Asian countries with the highest inflation rate in 2022. What is inflation? Inflation is the sustained increase in the prices of goods and services in an economy over time. It means that on average, more money is needed to purchase the same quantity of goods and services than before. The President stated that inflation rate is moving in the right direction. From 8.7% in January, our inflation has continued to ease up in all regions, settling now at 5.4% for June. What is that to the ordinary Filipino? While it is encouraging to note that inflation has eased to 5.4% as of June 2023, we must acknowledge that the prolonged period of high inflation rates has already affected the purchasing power and overall welfare of many Filipinos. The average inflation rate of 7.2% recorded between January and June 2023 exceeds the projected range of 5 to 6% for the year. When the Regional Wage Board in the National Capital Region increased the minimum wage by 7%, because that is the percentage of 40 pesos to 570 pesos, were they just intending for our minimum wage workers to merely survive by keeping up with inflation? What has therefore happened to the state policy found in Article 2, Section 9 of the 1987 Constitution that the state shall promote a just and dynamic social order that will ensure the prosperity and independence of the nation and free the people from poverty through policies that promote a rising standard of living and an improved quality of life for all? We should get no consolation from the projection that inflation will be at 2.9% by 2024, especially if this came from people who did not foresee that inflation would reach an alarming peak of 8.7% at the beginning of this year. The oversight of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas must be strengthened, like making them appear before Congress at least twice a year to justify their programs and decisions, like the decision to remove Philippine abaca from Philippine banknotes. An additional observation, our peso has lost a lot of value very quickly. Aren't the people entitled to an explanation from the government on why the price of onion reached an all-time high of 800 pesos per kilo in December 2022, making onion more expensive than meat? Also, why sugar prices have spiked to as high as 136 pesos per kilo? While we are on the topic of sugar, we should also ask the government to explain the following. 1. Why has the price of sugar remained high despite the flooding of imported sugar into the market? 2. Why has the Sugar Regulatory Administration been rocked by 2 scandals already in less than a year? 3. Why has there been a sugar shipment in the port of Batangas on February 9, 2023, ahead of the issuance of Sugar Order Number 6, which was only approved on February 15, 2023? 4. Why did the Department of Agriculture, claiming it acted on direct orders from Malacanang, choose only 3 favored traders to import the sugar in direct contravention of the provisions of Sugar Order Number 6, providing for the process in awarding the volume of importation. On the issue of smuggling, the President said, bilang na ang mga araw ng mga smugglers at hoarders na yan. Kilala na ba natin sila para makapag-umpisa na tayo sa pagbibilang ng araw? There is rampant agricultural smuggling into the Philippines, and there are reports of drug smuggling out of the Philippines. There are reports too of personalities involved in these smuggling activities being able to join the President on his foreign trips. So, just a word of advice and caution to the staff of the President, to the office of the President. Please exercise vigilance and impose the highest standards in qualifying personalities as part of the presidential delegation or of the people allowed to be seen and associated with the President. Sa larangan ng pabahay, ito ang sinabi ng Pangulo. Kung susumahin natin ito, mahigit 1 milyong kabahayan ang maialay natin sa ating mga kababayan sa buong bansa. I think the President is over-promising on the housing units that can be delivered in a year's time. I don't think it can be done. Those providing these housing units better be careful because we cannot rush these units, especially if their plan is to provide these housing units in high-rise structures. These structures need the proper time for curing, which cannot be rushed. My suggestion is not to go high-rise. House and lots are better than high-rise housing buildings. Past experience has shown this to us, and I am sure future experience will still confirm this. Executive action can make sure that there is transportation to and from these sites. We should start paying attention to the Housing Affordability Index in the Philippines. This measurement compares average housing prices with average salary. Makikita natin na hirap na ang mga kabataan ngayon na magkaroon at makabili ng kanilang sariling tahanan. When it comes to energy, I join the President in his efforts to increase our energy production and pursue total electrification. Indeed, renewable energy is the way forward. But all these efforts must have the consumer, the Filipino people, in mind. Masyado ng piga ang taong bayan. More than competitive pricing of electricity, what we need is a reasonable, affordable, and cheap price for electricity. Here in this land of ours, which is blessed with much sunshine and rain, surrounded by seas and dotted with wonderful volcanoes. I join the President in his commendation of the BARM and pledge my support too to the progress of the BARM. I support the President's effort to make the pension of the military and the uniformed personnel fully functional and financially sustainable. Given our one fund concept, the problem with the MUP pension system is the entire government's problem too. We shall try to make the transition as painless as possible. But should this turn out not to be totally possible, then we should all be ready to bear our share of the burden. The solidarity with our MUPs starts with a budget. We should discourage the bloating, eliminate the wasting, and stop the hemorrhaging of funds to our budget. I also support the President's call for the creation of the Department of Waters. I suggest that this agency be given jurisdiction over water resources and bodies of water from ridge to reef. The President mentioned the Samal Island Davao City Connector Bridge. May I just inform the President that the prospective beneficiaries of this bridge have serious objections about its alignment, which they claim will cause the irreversible and irreparable destruction of the Paradise Reef. The President mentioned the Maharlika Investment Fund, the MIF, but only in passing. It is good that the MIF was not touted to be his administration's greatest achievement in its first year, because achievement clearly it is not. What is sad is that to make 125 billion pesos earn, we have to spend first around 2.5 billion pesos. Another thing that is sad is that the first to get jobs out of this Maharlika Investment Fund will surely be the members of a group of internationally recognized economic managers, which the President mentioned. And most likely, these people would be foreigners. The Maharlika Investment Fund was not mentioned in the first SONA. This is the first time that it is mentioned in a SONA, and it is already a law, having overtaken the 20 priority legislative measures mentioned in the first SONA. The President should have explained to the Filipino people why he pushed for this measure, why he rushed this measure, when it is not necessarily needed. Hindi po ako makapaniwala na hindi ito makakadagdag sa ating utang. Congress gave the Maharlika Investment Corporation the power to incur more debt. Add to this the fact that the so-called investable funds from government banks, which make up its initial capital and funding, may also be deposit liabilities. Utang din yan. Up to this very moment, I am still questioning the wisdom, the need, and the propriety of even proposing this MIF. The procedure followed in approving the Maharlika Investment Fund Act is another matter which I believe will be questioned in court in due time. I just hope that the letters MIF will ultimately turn out to mean that this madness isn't forever. Just for the information of everyone, when the President mentioned his trips abroad, he said that these economic missions have yielded an estimated total investment value of 3.9 trillion pesos with a potential to generate 175,000 jobs. In contrast, when we were discussing the 125 billion pesos funding for the Maharlika, the claim was that this amount would generate 350,000 direct jobs. The President, who is a mathematician, knows his numbers better than some of his economic advisors. To help the President in his governance, I suggest the following ideas. For the President to already appoint a regular Secretary of the Department of Agriculture. And as a mathematician myself, I appeal to the President to personally review the formulas our agencies use when they compute for the national demand for the various agricultural products. These are the formulas our agencies use to justify the importation of these commodities. There is something fishy in the formulas. The Department of Trade and Industry should come up with specific and detailed programs to guide and handhold our micro and small enterprises, as well as our creatives industry, on how they can take full advantage of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, the RCEP, and other trade agreements for them to access markets outside of the Philippines. We should also exert effort to genuinely guide those serious long-term foreign investors on how to deal with our, let me just call it, unique governmental system of permits and approvals. Some find our system too complicated. Some say corrupt. I say, let's make it navigable. Maybe a one-stop shop can do the trick. Di malasakit para sa mamumuhunan center, an extension of Senator Bongo's idea to the area of trade and investments. Tax reform must be pursued in both procedure and substance. But I wish we will push the envelope further. I believe it is about time to discuss or consider replacing the VAT system of taxation, which is complicated to administer and full of leakages, with a much simpler to administer and monitor goods and services tax, GST. Hindi ba natin napapansin na tuwing SONA, ang mga sektor na nababanggit parati ay ang mga magsasaka, mangingisda, manggagawa, mga mamimili, at ang mahihirap. Tapos, bilang na bilang lamang ang mga membro nila sa Kongreso. Kaya, panahon na mapabuti natin ang party list system natin. Let us reform the party list system law by allowing more representation, if not limiting the representation, to these truly marginalized sectors. Let us encourage the formation of more political parties for farmers, workers, workers' party, consumers, among others. The state of the nation is worrisome, nakakabagabag, nakakabahala. There is too much inequality in our land. Inequality can be measured by wealth inequality, income inequality, and even inequality in the benefits from GDP growth. It is about time that our economic managers also give us accurate reports on these matters. As of 2022, the Philippines ranked 15th out of 63 countries in terms of income inequality. The lower the number, the worse is the situation. In the report released by the World Bank, it was found that the Philippines has among the highest rates of income inequality in East Asia. The top 1% of Filipino earners get 17% of the national income, while the bottom 50% collectively share 14%. When it comes to poverty, a survey conducted by the social weather stations reveals that nearly half of Filipino families, 45% or around 12.5 million households, consider themselves poor as of July 2023. Out of the 12.5 million who consider themselves poor, 2 million households are newly poor, meaning they were not poor a few years back. Meanwhile, another 33% rated themselves as borderline poor. 2,700,000 Filipinos experienced involuntary hunger. 2,300,000 experienced moderate hunger, while 340,000 faced severe hunger. In Mindanao, hunger is affecting more than 720,000 families. 95 Filipino children die from malnutrition every day. 28 out of 1,000 do not get past the age of 5 years old. 1 in every 3 Filipinos aged 5 and below suffer from stunting. The Philippines ranks 5th among countries in East Asia and Pacific region with the highest prevalence of stunting. Poor health, if it will not lead to early death, will lead to poor academic performance, impaired cognitive development, and will reinforce the poverty cycle. The increasing gap between the rich and the poor has given rise to profound inequalities in income, wealth, and benefits from economic growth. This disturbing trend necessitates urgent examination and action to ensure a more equitable and inclusive society for all. There were important subject matters left out of the President's SONA. Let me mention just some of them. There are 2 related areas where the President is given our Constitution great authority: national defense and international relations. Hence, it was disappointing not to hear from the President, SONA, his explanation or even point of view in the following subject matters. 1, the West Philippine Sea. 2, the EDCA sites. 3, the Afghan refugees. And 4, the U.S. military aircraft landing in our airports. I was hoping that the President, given that he has wide latitude in defense and foreign policy, would have explained why we needed to expand the EDCA sites of the U.S. military. Because there may be a neighboring country which looks at us and then says, you want to be a friend to all and an enemy to none, and yet you are participating in a containment policy of another power? We have heard some people describe the Philippines as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. We should not be happy about this. We should never subscribe to this image of the Philippines. The people who use these terms and mental images are not Filipinos. They are not from here. They live safely far away from our shores. The Philippines is our home. We live here. We have children here. We have daycare centers, schools, and playgrounds here. There are no elementary schools in aircraft carriers. We should think of the Philippines as the home of the Filipino people. We should not think and never think of the Philippines in military hardware terms. As a responsible member of the community of nations, we should do our part as a friendly people. Instead of hosting foreign military forces and bases, which could be interpreted by other nations as directed against them, why don't we instead host talks which improve the relations between and among nations? Host talks, not bases. Sana napaliwanag din ng Pangulo yung panukala na gawing host ang Pilipinas ng refugees at former U.S. employees and contractors from Afghanistan. Sa lawak ng lupain sa Amerika, bakit kailangan dito pa sa Pilipinas gagawin ang processing tapos ang ending nila ay sa US din naman pala? There was also nary a word about the report on increased sightings of U.S. military aircrafts using our airports. Another curious omission is this administration's policy on POGOs. Why are POGO operations still being allowed to continue in spite of findings that the risks of allowing POGO operations outweigh the so-called benefits? Business groups have issued a manifesto to ban POGOs. The Department of Finance and NEDA have discussed the social cost of POGOs, that their continued operations in our country pose a reputational risk that could dissuade foreign firms from investing in the Philippines, discourage foreign tourists from visiting our shores, and result in severe economic consequences for our country. Crimes related to POGOs, kidnappings, tortures, illegal detention, cyber fraud, scams, tax evasions, and human trafficking, among many others, have been well documented and are increasing. Yet there has been no action, no change in policy. The Philippines is fast becoming another scam capital of the world, no thanks to these POGO operations. Our very hardworking colleague, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, has questioned why it took PAGCOR 4 years to investigate the crimes committed in a POGO hub in Pampanga. If PAGCOR were truly inspecting the POGO hubs twice a week, as they have claimed, how come they did not see the 1,100 victims of human trafficking in Sun Valley POGO hub alone? In another case, there were 1,534 Filipinos and over 1,000 foreign nationals rescued in a raid on an offshore gaming service provider in Las Piñas City. The President has been quoted as saying in one press briefing, and I quote him, "The problems in reference to POGOs come from the illegal ones, not the legal ones. But in the example that I have given involving the Sun Valley Business Hub in Mabalacat, Pampanga, it was a legal POGO which was involved. The CGC Technologies Incorporated, an accredited service provider operating under the offshore gaming licensee Oriental Game Limited. So why the inaction? Since the Philippines is fast becoming one of the scam capitals of the world, to combat this, I suggest that the government should institute kalaban ng pandaraya programs and beef up enforcement of our laws against fraud. In President Marcos's first SONA, he mentioned 19 or 20 pieces of legislation, of which none has been enacted into law. In the second SONA, the President enumerated 16 new pieces of legislation. The LEDAC lists 20 pieces of legislation. All the lists are different from each other. What are we supposed to make of these lists? There is no focus. We are jumping all over the place. The state of the nation is worrisome, nakakabagabag, nakakabahala. Konting ulan, baha. Mga bundok natin, kalbo. Reklamo sa korupsyon, kaliwat kanan. Power trippers at abusado, nagkalat. Hustisya, mabagal, at mailap. Mga bilihin, mahal. Sweldo, kulang. Ang piso, wala nang halaga. Pag ma-hospital ka, patay ka. Ang lipunan, hindi patas. Ang buhay, mahirap. We cannot afford to lose time and waste resources. Let us focus on what is truly important to the life of the Filipino. We need to get our acts together as problem solvers. Let us use our kokote for the common good. We need to act in good faith out of love for country. We need to want a just and fair, progressive and safe society. No amount of sloganeering, rebranding, and law governance can hide the true state of our nation. Ang kailangan natin ay formula for development tulad ng creativity, connectivity, community, Ang formula ay naaksyonan, ang slogan hindi. Hindi katumbas ng pagbabago ang pag-unlad. Ang slogan na Bagong Pilipinas ay hindi pa hahalagahan ng taong bayan hanggang sa makita at maramdaman nila na ang pagbabagong ito ay may kaakibat na pag-unlad sa pagtaas at pagbuti ng antas ng pamumuhay ng bawat pamilyang Pilipino. Ang Senate minority ay handang magsakripisyo at gampanan ang trabaho nila para sa isang makatarungan, patas at progresibong Republika ng Pilipinas. Sa dami ng mga problema at hamon na ating kinakaharap bilang isang bansa, kailangan magtulungan tayo. At sa tulong ng Diyos at ng buong sambayanang Pilipino, alam ko na tayo'y magtatagumpay. Maraming salamat po sa inyo lahat.
Thank you very much, our Minority Leader. Session is suspended.
Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2165 under Committee Report number 64. This is the bill on automatic income classification of local government units. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, resumption of consideration of Senate Bill 2165 under Committee Report number 64 is now in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of interpellation. On that note, I move to resume the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor of the measure, Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito, our Deputy Majority Leader, and to continue his interpellation, our Senate Minority Leader, Aquilino Coco Pimentel III. So move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, resumption of the period of interpellation is in order, and we recognize the sponsor, Senator J.V. Ejercito, and to interpellate the Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel.
Yes, we're ready, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. This will just be a continuation of the interpellation, Mr. President. So thank you for your patience because initially I found this bill, although the title sounds simple, but a bit complicated, Mr. President. So if the sponsor will spread into the records, as well as inform all of those listening to us and interested in LGU matters, what is the purpose of this income classification of provinces, cities, and municipalities, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, the three main objectives are as follows. To regularly and accurately update the income classification of LGUs according to their current financial capabilities. Second is to provide for predictable and transparent indicators in adjusting the income brackets. And last, Mr. President, to incentivize the LGUs for their efforts in terms of their locally sourced income. So these are the three main objectives of this income classification, Your Honor.
On the third purpose, Mr. President, how will this bill, if we update it, incentivize the LGUs?
Yes, Your Honor, Mr. President, performing LGUs in the last 3 years, if they are consistent with their tax collection, their increase in revenues, as long as the finance department shows that there is effort on their part on their development to improve their collection and revenues, then they will be rewarded as well, Your Honor, Mr. President, what we call top up. So the LGUs that exerted effort to improve will be rewarded, no, by them being reclassified to the next level, Your Honor.
We are working on, right, as of the moment, there is an existing table for the income classification, and then we are now changing the numbers or amending the numbers. Was there a consistent formula followed from the minimum amount to the maximum amount of the different brackets, Mr. President?
Yes, Your Honor, Mr. President, because I think the main concern of Your Honor last time is why are we giving the discretion to the Department of Finance Secretary, but actually his decision will be based on the parameters, no? The income ranges provided in the bill will be adjusted by the UF Secretary based on the growth rate of the ARI, the annual regular income, from the last income classification, and also take into consideration the inflation and the regional gross domestic product or the regional GDP, Your Honor. So these are the three parameters wherein the Secretary of Finance will be basing his his decision to adjust the income classification of the LGUs, Your Honor.
So, for example, Mr. President, in the Executive Order 249, I think this is what we are amending. Yes, and the only reason we are amending an EO by law is because this was issued at a time when the EO had the force and effect of law. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Yes, that's correct, Your Honor.
So, for example, in the classification of provinces, in that said EO, the first class province would have obtained an average annual income of 30 million pesos or more. In our bill, the first class province should have obtained an average annual regular income of 1,500,000,000 pesos. So, my question, Mr. President, is, was there a formula applied to the 30 million pesos in the EO so that it now becomes 1.5 billion in the bill? And did we apply that formula consistently on all the figures found in the EO? Ganun ba? Ano ba yan? Mukhang ginawa ba niya? Times 50?
Yes, Your Honor, Mr. President, I believe that the table that you have now is the old one based on the 1987 EO 249. And this is the new parameters or the new formula that we will now be following, which I mentioned earlier, will now be based on ARI, the annual regular income, the inflation, and the regional GDP, Your Honor.
So if I look at the amount in the EO, it's 30 million pesos or more. This now becomes 1.5 billion pesos or more. That means we multiplied the 30 million by 50. 50, di ba? Did we do that to all of the? Is that the formula? How we determine the other figures in the bill, Mr. President? Did we just multiply the numbers found in the EO with 50? Kasi ang sagot hindi.
Your Honor, the formula was applied to all LGUs. Just to give you an example, Mr. President, Your Honor, in 2009, for example, the province, no, would have an income, for example, of an ARI of 67,168,667. But in 2023, it will now be 222,572,659, or a growth rate of 231%. So this will be the growth rate of the ARI of LGUs from 2009 to fiscal year 2023, Your Honor, Mr. President.
So what is the, Mr. President, just to simplify nga, the EO that we are amending also has figures, designating the minimum of a bracket to the maximum of that same bracket. We also follow that in the bill. There are also figures. What is the relationship between the numbers found in the EO and in the bill? Did we apply a certain formula na straightforward yung paglipat ng number times 50 ba?
Your Honor, Mr. President, the formula before in 1987, based on the EO, is only based on the era at the time. But now in this amendment that we are proposing, it will now be based on the three parameters, no, that I have mentioned again, ARI, the regional gross domestic product, and inflation of the province or the LGU. So That's the main difference, Your Honor, Mr. President. Before, it was just based on era, Your Honor.
So let's apply, Mr. President, to the provinces para lang po klaro maintindihan po ng representation na ito. For example, for the provinces, the third class, let's just use the third class. Third class province under the bill would have obtained an average annual regular income of 900 million pesos or more, but less than 1,200,000,000 pesos. And then your second class, 1.2 billion to 1.5, and then your first class, 1.5 and above. How were those figures determined, Mr. President? Yun lang yung basic tanong ko, Mr. President. Arbitrary or basta the authors just chose these numbers?
Your Honor, Mr. President, the formula will be the ARI of the previous year multiplied by the over the ARI of this year. That will determine the growth rate, and then we multiply it by income. So again, the formula is ARI of previous of last year over the ARI of this year, and multiply it by the growth rate by the income, Your Honor, Mr. President.
So complicated pala, Mr. President.
Yes, Your Honor, this is mathematics, Your Honor. I think you will understand it more than me.
Now, when I don't understand it, I label it complicated, Mr. President. Anyway, sige, basta if the bill is passed, then this will be the brackets, Mr. President. One problematic area that we consider as problematic, Mr. President, is the delegation to the Secretary of Finance of the power to actually come up with the new numbers. Parang ganon eh. So, with the new numbers, which determine now the minimum and the maximum of the brackets, Mr. President. So my question is, Mr. President, why do we need to give this power to the Secretary of Finance when after we enact this into law, the brackets or the table providing for the minimum and maximum amounts of the income classification would be good for a certain number of years anyway, Mr. President. So that means if they will prove to be, should they prove to be obsolete or unrealistic numbers already, then Congress will have time. We'll have time to react, Mr. President, because this would be good for, let's say, sa 3 years yata sa ating bill, but we could extend actually the validity of the new table that we will pass to make it 5 years, Mr. President. Tama, pwede na nasalo lang yung 3 years.
But Your Honor, Mr. President, the last time we had the classification was 2009. It's already 2023, Your Honor, Mr. President. And it will be unfair for other LGUs who have exerted effort for them to develop and for them not to be automatically classified. And with your concern again that we are leaving it to the Secretary of Finance sa discretion to reclassify the LGUs. We are delegating, but it's already computation. It's not really discretionary anymore for the Secretary of Finance because there are already parameters that we have already included in the bill. So ang magiging trabaho na lang niya, Mr. President, is really to compute no, to compute the ability and the capability GDP and inflation and the prevailing situation, Mr. President.
So what will happen, Mr. President, is if we enact this bill into law, together with that delegation of legislative power to the Secretary of Finance, then practically speaking, this will be the last time that Congress will bother itself with the subject matter, Mr. President, because bahala na si Secretary of Finance. Ganun po ba yun? After this becomes law.
Your Honor, Mr. President, given our oversight function, we can always review, probably regularly. But I think giving this discretion already to the Secretary of Finance will give justice, no, to the LGUs already that are performing. And as I mentioned, I don't think we have to have any worry anymore. We did not worry because there will be parameters that will be followed. But I think as I mentioned, given our oversight function, we can review this every so often, as often as we like. And we just do not want to have the same problem that we had, that the last classification was really 2009 and 14 years thereafter. Your Honor, Mr. President, it's unfair to those LGUs that have really performed well but are still not given the proper reclassification, because they will be denied of the benefits, no, of being reclassified. For example, the financial capability, the loans that they can go into so that they can further continue the development. So these are the things that, and also the salaries, no? So these are the things that we will deprive some LGUs if we fail to give them automatic reclassification, Your Honor. Just like what happened, it took almost 14 years, no? From
Yes,
the
Mr.
last time that the classification of LGUs was passed by Congress, Your Honor.
That's why, Mr. President, it is to the credit of the sponsor that is really shepherding this bill through the legislative mill, is championing the cause of these hardworking and deserving LGUs, that their efforts will be recognized. So when this bill becomes law, that would now happen. Even the table will be updated, etc. But that the problem actually is the delegation of legislative power. This will be the last time or the last moment where Congress will be involving itself with this subject matter, because even though you have oversight, you recommend and you pass a bill to amend the law, it can be vetoed by the President, because if the Secretary of Finance exercises the power and he is the alter ego of the President, it is actually also the President exercising the power. That is the problem that is our problem, Mr. President, with the delegation of legislative power. But the modernizing of the concept, this will not only be purely income classification. Meron pang topping up yata. There will be some formula to be applied to determine some other factors to honor the best performers among our LGUs. We welcome that concept. The updating of the table, because the amounts are already unrealistic, because these are more than 14 years old, more pa. So we welcome that development, Mr. President, and it will be to the credit of our sponsor that we will have a new LGU income classification method and approach. Yun lang ang problem, sir, Mr. President, talaga. It's why the need to delegate the power? When we pass this bill, we would have proven that Congress can react. We reacted late. Tama na yung blame game, but we still will react. And then, so the future, we will learn our lesson and we will react more timely, in a more timely manner, Mr. President. So I think the the objectives of the bill will still be achieved even without the delegation of legislative power, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, I just also to answer your concern, Senate Bill number 2165 complies with the requisites on valid delegation of legislative power. No? For the record, there are two tests to determine the validity of delegation of legislative power. Number one, the completeness test, and number two, the sufficient standard test. Applying the aforementioned test, the provision of Senate Bill number 2165 satisfies the requirements for valid delegation for the following reasons. Number one, the proposed bill set forth the policy to be carried out by the Secretary of Finance, that is to ensure that the income classification of local government units conform with the prevailing economic conditions and the overall financial capability and fiscal position of the local government units. Thus, it passes the completeness test. Number two, the bill also sets sufficient standards and identify the limit of the delegated authority, as the bill provides the following. The Secretary of Finance is mandated to undertake the regular income reclassification once every 3 years while following the income classification under Section 4 of the proposed bill, which are for the record, will be based on the parameters, the growth of ARI, or the annual regular income, regional GDP, and inflation. And also, last is the Secretary of Finance can review the income ranges, provide the bill, and make appropriate changes or revisions in accordance with the policy set forth by the bill, which is again to ensure that the income classification of local government units conform with the prevailing economic conditions and the overall financial status of the local government units. As such, the proposed bill satisfies the sufficient standard test. So again, Mr. President, I think what we are delegating to the Secretary is really not really it's not really discretionary, but in fact, he is just there to compute based on these parameters, based on the capability and the prevailing economic conditions of which the LGUs are prevailing in the present conditions, Mr. President.
Mr. President, did the sponsor read the upcoming amendments to the bill? Because the bill currently as written, without the constitutionality of the delegation of legislative power as currently written. So was what the sponsor read the ano tawag mo doon? Intended amendments, Mr. President?
Yes, Sir Honor, Mr. President, we have set about ano ba to? 4 amendments, individual amendments to Senate Bill number 2165, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. But then, Mr. President, our sponsor just answered the question on did we make sure that the delegation of legislative power will be compliant with the Constitution? But there's another question, the question of the wisdom. Should we delegate? And that's the initial position of this representation is there is no need to delegate because all the objectives of the author, of the person who came up with the idea of this bill, can be achieved even without delegation of legislative power. So if we should we decide to delegate, we have to make sure that it is compliant with the Constitution. Okay.
That's correct.
We can still decide not to delegate. So we should not delegate just because we can delegate. We should delegate because we find it wise to delegate because it anticipates the solution to many of anticipated problems, Mr. President. But in this particular case, papagandahin na natin ang konsepto ng income classification. Maganda, to the credit of this Congress yun. May bagong concepts tayong ilalagay. It will not be mere income. You will be classified starting with income and then application of some other tests and factors, then you will get your final classification. The number two, the brackets, the amounts in the brackets will be brought to realistic 2023 levels or amounts. Therefore, we've done it, Mr. President. We have modernized and we have come up with a new LGU income classification which will incentivize the LGUs kasi there will be some points to their credit. So I find the delegation of power, which is legislative in nature, to the Secretary of Finance totally not necessary and uncalled for, Mr. President, because we achieve our objectives anyway, even without it, Mr. President.
But Mr. President, the main objective of this bill is really for efficiency. And as I mentioned, we would not be sure when the next income classification would be, when Congress would act another income classification. So it's the intention is really for efficiency. Anyway, Mr. President, this is not anymore policy. And with given the parameters that I mentioned earlier, it will now be based on formulas. No? And as I mentioned, it's what we are delegating to the Department of Finance Secretary is not anymore discretionary, but in fact, I think it's really more is of computation based on the prevailing situation, based on the ARI, based on the GDP and other factors, economic factors, Mr. President. So, kumbaga, nililibre na natin Kongreso since it's not policy anymore. In computation, let us leave it to the Finance Department, Finance Managers, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you for that explanation, Mr. President. But I'm wary of the inefficiency argument, Mr. President, because we will find our entire system of lawmaking inefficient, Mr. President. Mayroon pa nga tayong 2 houses, napaka-inefficient. So,
but just to give you an information, Your Honor, Mr. President, ito po yung mga years that the income classification was passed by Congress. 1959, 1974, 1987, and then 2009, and then 2023. So, medyo yung gap niya is it's always almost 20 years apart all the time. So we will just give you the information, no? So again, it's 1959,
Yes,
1974 to 1987, and then 2009. So medyo matagal, Mr. President.
yes, Mr. President. Pero tignan nyo, Mr. President, the new concepts in this bill excites all of us. Pati ako na-excite ako dun sa sinasabi nyong it's no longer mere income. Initially, yun ang classification, yung income, and then you apply some certain formula to come up with the final income classification of the LGUs. Okay. It excites all of us. New approach. Therefore, we should trust future Congresses that they will also do their job kung luma na kung yung 1.2 billion and 1.5 billion na for the second class province, yung bracket, hindi na realistic, then Congress will adjust, Mr. President. I trust Congress, I trust future Congresses will react and will adjust. And they will learn from our lesson, from the manifestation of the sponsor na masyadong matagal ang ating pag-react, then they will quote the transcript and they will now react in a more timely manner, Mr. President. So, actually, Mr. President, gumanda na yung bill with the upcoming amendments. Maganda na yung konsepto, inayos na. It's just that policy question, Mr. President, should we pati pa ba yan? Should we delegate? I mean, sooner or later, if we begin to delegate all of our powers, Mr. President, talagang haba na yung bakasyon po natin, Mr. President. I mean, there are some functions in government which are legislative in nature. When we run for senator and to be lawmaker, we were ready to perform these functions, let us not slowly delegate them away, Mr. President.
Senator Tolentino, I think wishes to, with the permission of the
Yes.
two gentlemen on the
If I
floor.
may interject, permission of the gentleman. May I ask from the minority leader, if this is an undue delegation?
May kaso kasi.
The present version, maybe the one that His Honor is going over, I believe is undue delegation of legislative power. But our sponsor, I think, read earlier some upcoming amendments where his team has tried to make it to make the delegation compliant with the Constitution. But my point, Mr. President, is compliant or not, should we delegate? Pati ba ito i-delegate pa? We could choose not to delegate, and that is a constitutional decision not to delegate. Mr. President.
There is a past case, is there not, Minority Leader, where a delegation was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court?
Marami kaso. Opo.
So if the proponent here would agree, Mr. President, to taper this or to remove the provision authorizing the Secretary of Finance, is there any alternative provision that the minority leader can propose to enable the author to fully have his intention executed here?
Even if we do not, if we take that concept out and not replace it, the bill is already workable and perfect, Mr. President. Improve pa. Ang ganda na ng konsepto eh. Tanggalin mo yun, it doesn't matter. It does not affect the brilliancy behind the proposal, Mr. President.
Because I think, Mr. President, the intent of the proponent here is to subject this to evolving economic conditions, which would entail the intervention of the incumbent Secretary of Finance relative to the figures and the tax collections, perhaps the income source. So it would really mean that the Secretary of Finance should be allowed to make the reclassification unless the good minority leader would want to have an oversight here as part of the section being questioned, composed of members of the Congress, as part of the mechanism that would trigger the intervention of the Secretary of Finance.
My position, Mr. President, I think it should be Congress which should be really be intervening and passing a law providing for the figures to be used in the income classification of LGUs. Tulad na nangyari ngayon. They involved us, they explained to us the nitty-gritty, and we appreciated the concept, Mr. President. Nakita natin, wow, okay, it's a good idea, you're improving the program. Congress must be involved, Mr. President. Ang mangyayari dito, we will be out of the picture. Maniwala kayo sa akin. If you now, in the future, you delegate the power, you want to remove it, you amend it, that will be vetoed by the President because you're removing the power from his alter ego. That's his own power, Mr. President.
So would that mean that the good minority leader is now inclined to accept, perhaps when we amend this, that the local government committees of both houses may recommend to the Secretary of Finance the reclassification every 3 years, etc.
Mr. President, nabaliktad na mundo dyan because right now they are the ones recommending to us. Now we want to delegate so that we will be the ones to recommend to them. I mean, siguro when we run to be members of the legislative body, we knew that this was one of our powers. Let us slowly delegate them para mabawasan po yung workload natin. So, baliktad na po yung mundo noon. I mean, it will now be Congress recommending to the Secretary of Finance. I think this is the better system, Mr. President. Many more minds are involved. Ang mangyayari once we delegate, only one mind will be involved, the Secretary of Finance. Of course, he will do his own consultation. Pero dito, mas maganda. Consultative, then deliberative, then very transparent. We will be required to explain Actually, Mr. President, basta when the Department of Finance team explained to me their ideas behind this modernized way of classifying our LGUs. I appreciated the idea. Let the power to reclassify remain and stay with Congress. Because the idea of delegating it to the Secretary of Finance, totally alien to the bill, totally separable from the bill. Yeah. So, andun pa rin yung ano eh. The objectives will still be achieved, Mr. President. So, yung worry na it will take 10, 20 years for the future Congress to respond, ang sagot ko na lang doon, short answer is, let's trust our successors that they will be as responsible as we are. Ano na po yun?
But Mr. President,
Mr. President.
if I may add, what was pointed out by Senator Tolentino, who was also a former mayor, being former mayors, we really strive hard, no, to improve our standing, our capability, so that we can further give chance for more development, no? For loans, for classification. There are a lot of advantages if you level up. And that Tagaytay was formerly also, just like San Juan was a municipality. But when it became a city, Your Honor, Mr. President, that even hastened our growth even more with that, given the benefits of being a city. So because as mentioned by Senator Tolentino, because of the changing economic and financial conditions at the LGU level, I think it will be more efficient really to delegate the authority to update income, again, based on parameters, to the Secretary of Finance, because it will be difficult if we had to go through the rigorous process of legislation, no? And as I mentioned earlier, it took years before Congress was able to pass legislation on income classification. So, and anyway, Mr. President, Your Honor, the Department of Finance will be required to pass a report on the income classification to Congress, to both houses, every 3 years. At the same time, in case we find future Congresses, even if we are still there or not anymore, if they find that this is not working efficiently, then as part of our legislative powers and functions, we can always repeal and take it back, Your Honor, Mr. President. But again, the intention here is really to make it more efficient, and again, to reward and to be fair to all the LGUs that are really striving hard to really to improve their financial standing, increase their revenues, Mr. President.
So thank you for that, Mr. President. So if it's a question of efficiency, I think the Senate can also, and the House can also reorganize themselves to be, and discipline themselves to be more efficient, Mr. President, today and in the future. So, yun lang po yung point ko, Mr. President. Anyway, we will move on to, sige, for the welcome ideas behind this bill, Mr. President. So, we will improve, di ba? We will improve our current way of just merely classifying LGUs by the income. What shall we do, Mr. President, after we determine the income of the LGU? What other tests shall we apply to separate the better performers from the average ones, Mr. President?
Again, Mr. President, just like what was mentioned, what was discussed earlier, if an LGU has consistently improved or increased their income or revenue for 3 consecutive years, so they will be rewarded, no, by being reclassified to the next level.
Ay, parang may points yon. Part or automatic na yon, Mr. President, ganun ba?
Yes, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Parang may
One level
points
up,
yun,
Your Honor, Mr. President. So that's a way to reward all these LGUs that have strived hard to improve their local finances and
So,
financial standing, Your Honor.
How about, because as explained to me, we will also consider per capita per capita local resource, ano? Excuse me, Mr. President. Per capita locally sourced revenue, Mr. President. So it's not just the 3-year trajectory of the locally generated income. So meron pa, other tests will be applied. Tama? Tama ba?
Yes, Your Honor, the annual income of their local resource per capita will also be
So per capita
part of it.
also,
Part-
and
Your Honor.
maybe if there are some other factors which will be considered to.
Your Honor, also inflation, it has to be factored, no, the real increase in inflation.
Wouldn't inflation affect all, Mr. President? Hindi, yung ano,
For the bracket, Your Honor, the inflation is will be a factor, but for the bracket, the inflation will be a factor, but for the top up will
yeah.
only be based on the ARI and local resource per capita, Your Honor, Mr. President.
So to at least two factors.
Two factors, yeah.
Okay, so yun po yung kinaganda nito, Mr. President. And those two factors were not used before when the LGUs were classified. Tama?
Yes, Your Honor, Mr. President. That's why it's only introduced in this
So
this bill, Your Honor.
that's my point, Mr. President. Pag naging itong panukala, naging batas, yun na, meron ng built-in ng ano, because nasa law yun, I mean, the Secretary of Finance will have to use those parameters as part of classifying the LGUs. So it's not really on income na eh. Income plus, lagyan na natin performance. Income plus financial performance, siguro ganon. So this is really an improved way of classifying our LGUs. Yung sagot kanina, Mr. President, the inflation will be considered by the Secretary of Finance in his new figures for the bracket should he be given the power. Yun. That's why, I mean, hindi na kailangan eh, kasi tayo sa Congress, don't tell us we are also insulated from actual economic development. Siyempre, alam din natin na sensitive din tayo na 10 years from now, 5 years from now, umiba na ang economic situation, alam din natin yun. So, then a bill will be introduced to improve the table. So that's the only issue I have, Mr. President, after the explanation by the DOF team earlier this afternoon. So I really got to appreciate the program actually, Mr. President. So,
Yes,
so
sir.
I appeal to the sponsor and to the DOF team if we really can seriously reconsider the totally separable idea of delegating the power to the Department of Finance Secretary. The bill can survive and will be good and will be remembered even without the delegation of legislative power, Mr. President. So I thank the sponsor for his patience.
Thank
with
you,
this
Mr.
presentation.
President. Likewise, just before we end on Mr. President, again, I would like to reiterate that the authority, I'd like to address your apprehension, Your Honor, Mr. President, but the authority no longer involves legislation, but it is already within the sphere of implementation of the Secretary of Finance. Will just compute again based on the parameters set forth in the bill, Your Honor, Mr. President. Thank you. Our Minority Leader, thank you very much.
Thank you, Minority Leader Pimentel. Majority Leader?
Yes, Mr. President, that's very enlightening, and I would say, Mr. President, a lot of members of the Senate would like to also put in their insights in order to come up with the best possible measure, Mr. President. Mr. President, there being no other member who wish to interpolate, I move that we close the period of interpellation. So move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this juncture, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2165 under Committee Report number 64. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is carried.
Mr. President, I move for a minute suspension.
Session suspended.
Mr. President, this juncture I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, August the 1st, 2023. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Session is adjourned until 3 o'clock of August the 1st. August the 1st, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.